Hi, I'm Patrick Fleury with bagmass.com, the only anesthesia career site built for professionals like yourself. Now, whether you're an anesthesiologist, a CRNA, or an AA, there's three things that you have in common. One, you worked really hard to get where you're at. The second is you sacrificed a lot of time to get there. And the third is you probably took on a mountain of student loan debt. And we're very lucky today to have a special guest with us. He's the host of one of my favorite podcasts, Anesthesia Success. He's a financial advisor, and more importantly, he's a student loan debt expert. And actually, when I think about it, there's something even more important with all this is that his wife is actually an anesthesia resident, so he understands what you guys are going through. And with that, I'd like to introduce Justin Harvey.
Thanks a lot for having me, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be here, and I certainly do empathize with any viewers out there who are sitting under a big pile of money that they owed Uncle Sam.
And we've all been there.
Yeah, or many of us have. And I've worked with a lot of people in that situation. I think I'm coming up on about 500 individual student loan consults that I've done. I work 1 day a week doing student loan consulting exclusively with a company called Student Loan Planner. That's where I have really cut my teeth in student loan analysis, specifically working with Travis Hornsby, who's one of the foremost student loan experts in America that I have heard of. And I'm really excited to be here to share a little bit about what I know. Obviously, this is a very dynamic time. It's a little bit like the Wild West right now, with not only I would say the situation with loans in general, student loans in general, is like the Wild West. In the last month and a half, it has only gotten much more so. So I'm glad to unpack that and try to help any viewers and listeners out there assess their situation and see what the best way forward might be.
Well, I'm curious, you're saying it's becoming more of the Wild West. Is this an advantage for people with student loan debt right now?
Good question. Is it an advantage? Maybe. So certain types of loans are going to be treated differently with new legislation. So anybody with federal direct loans, and I'll get to this in my presentation in a minute, direct loans are the most favorable, the most friendly, the most flexible. They generally qualify for all the different types of forgiveness, for all the different options for repayment. So I'd say if you have direct loans, the changes happening right now and other changes being discussed may well be to your advantage. Other types of loans like FFEL loans or other types of federal loans or private loans, your situation is a bit more static. And so any changes either aren't going to impact you. Well, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. They're probably not going to impact your situation.
Okay.
So with that, I'll dive into the presentation. And Patrick, please hit me with as many questions as you can think of as we go. So it's not just me.
Sounds good. I know you like to talk, so I'll try to hop in there every once in a while.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So everybody out there has probably got student loans, and I want to tell you how to make them suck less based on the hundreds of individual consults that I've done. So I don't need to tell the people in this audience that student loans are a big problem in this country, and that there's a lot of people out there that are a little bit pessimistic about their student loan situation. But the good news is, if you get a little bit informed about the types of loans that you have, and you distill the questions to a fundamental question that I'm going to get to in a few minutes, you can have a bit more certainty and a bit more, perhaps, dare I say it, optimism about your student loan situation. So I want this to be, first I'm going to give you the bad news, and then I'll give you the good news. So first, as it relates to the current landscape, there's a lot of uncertainty as far as the borrower experience. Like, how do I pay these back? Why is my interest rate so high? There's so many overwhelming options. There's so many different repayment plans. Standard, graduated, extended, revised pay-as-you-earn, IBR, ICR, income sensitive, just to name a few, as well as questions around forgiveness, around refinancing, around consolidation. There's a lot of very technical terminology that can be very overwhelming. And so if you're out there and you're confused, you're definitely not alone. And it's very justifiable because, frankly, I talk to a lot of financial planners, financial advisors, whose job it is, you could argue, to be experts on these things. And many of them have no clue, have no idea. And to be honest, I was that advisor a few years ago, just because it's so complicated and you don't even know what you don't know. It's a very technical topic. In addition, Jeff Bezos, a kind of polarizing man today in America, has coined this word complexifier, which means something that makes another thing more complicated. And student loans has a lot of these complexifiers. So this list, you'd think this is complicated. There's actually other things that make it even more complicated. having to do with taxes, where you live, how big your family is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all things that, depending on how you answer these questions about your career, about your family, about where you live, it may actually significantly change your strategy, may change your ability to get forgiveness, may change how much you need to pay, et cetera. And so it's complicated. But if you have a little bit of context for your situation, we can hopefully make it less complicated. And potentially you can get enough information to say, should I maybe talk to an expert to help me answer these questions more fully? So to boil it down to what I call the critical question, every person facing federal student loans, and I'm going to set private loans aside for a moment. If you're facing federal student loans, here's the question you should be asking yourself. And I'm going to lean on my favorite here, Morpheus. Should I go for forgiveness and take the red pill? Or should I go for full repayment and take the blue pill? Fundamentally, every federal loan has this binary question built in. Should I go for forgiveness, where I'm paying the least that I possibly can? I'm getting on an income-driven plan. I have employment that may qualify for PSLF, or maybe I'm going for longer-term taxable forgiveness, and I'm trying to pay the very smallest amount to get the very, very biggest amount of forgiveness. That's the red pill. Blue pill is full repayment, meaning I make too much, I don't owe enough. Forgiveness is not really an option, either because my employment doesn't qualify for PSLF or because I have a lot of growth opportunity with my career. And therefore, doing what I would call the Dave Ramsey approach of just trying to keep your expenses low and pay off your debt as aggressively as possible, potentially in conjunction with a private refinance, is going to be a better option. So understanding that this decision, this red pill, blue pill binary decision, one or the other, making that decision as soon as possible about every federal loan that you have is, in most cases, the most efficient way to handle your student loans. Does that make sense?
So far, I was wondering, how do you even start the process? And I might be jumping ahead in the presentation. How do you start deciding, should I go for forgiveness or full repayment?
Great question. I'm glad you asked. And so there's this fork in the road that borrowers experience when they are asking these questions. And in order to determine the way forward, determine forgiveness or repayment, here are some important questions to answer. What kind of loans do you have? Are they direct loans? Are they FFEL loans? Are they Perkins? Are they private loans of some flavor or type? And based on those loan balances and based on your current income, how much are you going to pay on these loans? And for example, and I'll get to a few examples at the end, but if you owe, a rule of thumb would be like 1 time your income or less. So if I'm making $150,000 and I owe $100,000, in most cases, that's going to be a situation in which full repayment is going to be a better option. Where if you invert that and say, I expect to make $150 and I owe $250 or $300, and especially in cases where I may qualify for PSLF, public service loan forgiveness, and I'll get to exactly what that means in a minute, then you may qualify for the forgiveness option. Now, I am sympathetic, Patrick, to your fundamental question of how do I know the way forward? There's some calculators online. I recommend the one at Student Loan Planner, for whom I work. I get paid on a per consult basis with them, so I don't really have a financial relationship other than the fact that I help people who need help there 1 day a week. But I would say Travis Hornsby, who founded Student Loan Planner, has built a really robust Excel-based calculator that anybody can download, punch in their expected income information, see their repayment options, and see whether or not PSLF might make sense for that, or any of the other forgiveness strategies. So as far as how do I answer the question of red pill, blue pill, that's a good first step. But frankly, it's akin to the question of how do I do my taxes? Well, you could use TurboTax, and for some people that's okay. But frankly, if you have some 1099 income and you're married and maybe you have kids and a mortgage and you give away some charitable stuff, it very quickly gets very technical. And student loans are similar. So I'm hesitant to try to equip somebody to do it themselves the same way I would be hesitant to try to equip them to do their own taxes. In most cases, if you're making a decision that's going to have a 5-figure or a 6-figure impact, it probably makes sense, if the way forward is not very, very, very clear, it probably makes sense to engage somebody to help you answer the question who may be an expert in that space.
Well, I agree completely. I tried the whole TurboTax the first couple of years when I came out and practicing, and quickly realized that I was not as adept at doing taxes as TurboTax made it seem like you're supposed to be. So I
Yeah.
think that's some great advice. And one of the things I'm curious about, you start. I think the idea of going to student loan planner is a great idea and hopping on that calculator. It's one of those things that we would probably start doing it anytime during our training. But when should we actually start thinking about how we're going to tackle these student loans?
Yeah. So you're saying what then?
Well, sort of, like how far into our training? Like if I have a year left in my residency, or I'm a SRNA, I know I have another 6 months or a year out. How soon should we actually be thinking about, I need to start getting on top of the student loan debt?
Yeah, I would say as soon as you're done taking out debt. So if you're an MS4 in med school, or if you're like just wrapping up CRNA school or AA school, right before you're about to go back to work and you're done taking out loans, that is the perfect time to begin to answer that question.
Okay.
And so at that point, and to discuss that and zoom in a minute here, there's an opportunity. Basically, as soon as you have all the facts, or at least as many facts as we can reasonably foresee. If you're an anesthesia resident, or you're going to be, if you're an MS4, you're going to have at least 4 years of residency where you're going to make not very much money relative to your eventual salary. If you have a fellowship year or two after that, then you might be 4 or 5 or 6 years into loan repayment and be paying very, very little that entire time. This makes you a perfect candidate for a forgiveness strategy if you think that you may ultimately have employment in the nonprofit sphere. So this is going to get into a little bit of those the questions about what is PSLF, what are the different forgiveness options. Mm-hmm. So let me switch back to the PowerPoint here. And let's talk about some of the terminology that you're going to be faced with. So, and this attaches, Patrick, to your question about answering some of these questions. So refinancing and consolidation are essentially opposites. They're words that get confused and conflated frequently. But it's important to know the distinction. So refinancing is when you take a federal loan or a private loan and you take it to a new loan with a private bank like SoFi, Credible, Earnest, LendKey, one of those private banks. The purpose of a refinance is to reduce your interest cost by lowering your interest rate and getting on, in most cases, a fixed schedule of a flat payment every month to do full repayment. That's the purpose of refinancing. That differs from consolidation in that consolidation is going from federal to federal. It's an administrative action where you take, whenever you finish med school, for example, or AA school or CRNA school, and you've got all of your different line items from undergrad from every semester you had, and then maybe a few from your graduate degree. And if you look at your student loan list, you've got like 20 different student loans. You can consolidate all of them and squish them together into a direct consolidated subsidized, and direct consolidated unsubsidized. That would be the same as the full balance of all of your loans. It just adds them all up. And the interest rate is the weighted average of all of the previous loans rounded up to the nearest 1/8 of a point. So it's functionally just taking all the debt and making it easier to look at, but it's all the same. Now, forgiveness is another question that is important to understand. What are the different types of forgiveness? So taxable forgiveness versus PSLF, public service loan forgiveness. The main difference between these two, and when I say going for forgiveness, taking that red pill, what that means is you're going to pay back a little bit on your loans and get a lot forgiven from Uncle Sam at the end of the line. Now that happens after either 20 years for taxable forgiveness, or 20 or 25 years, or 10 years for PSLF. So PSLF, for a moment, is the forgiveness opportunity that exists for people who work in nonprofit land. So academic medicine, nonprofit community hospital, VA, or similar. It's going to exclude anybody in a for-profit hospital, a for-profit physician, like a multi-specialty group, or any other anybody not under the 501c3 or government umbrella. So PSLF is a very, very rich benefit for those who qualify, especially for anesthesia residents, but this is true also for CRNAs and AAs, because after 10 years, if you make these relatively modest payments compared to the amount that you owe, then at the end, you get tax-free forgiveness. So to take an example, if I'm an anesthesia resident, I graduate from med school with $300,000 in loans. I do residency for 4 years where I'm making $65,000. My payment might be $300 a month, so I'm paying about $3 to $4 grand a year for 4 years. So I'm paying $4,000 a year for 4 years. That's $16,000 I've paid towards PSLF. And as a resident, my employment qualifies for PSLF because I'm working, in most cases, in academic medicine. So I get 4 years into a 10-year forgiveness track, only paying between 16 and 20 grand. Then if I do a fellowship or maybe 2, then this kind of rubber stamps forward a couple more years, and I can get literally halfway to PSLF and pay very, very little, during which time my balance is probably going from 300 to 320 to 340,000. And this is why it's important at the outset, and when I say the outset, I mean like when you're done with med school, to know, am I going for forgiveness or full repayment? Because if I think I love academic medicine, I could never see myself anywhere except for a university hospital, then I know literally at the very beginning I should be paying as little as possible, maybe do fellowships, keep on paying very little. And then when I become an attending, I want to be on a capped payment plan, like income-based repayment or pay-as-you-earn. Those are capped plans where there's a maximum equal to the 10-year standard payment of some fixed amount, call it like $3,000, $4,000 a month. So on the back half, I'm going to be paying a lot more money. Maybe I'm paying 50 grand a year or 40 grand a year for the last 3 or 4 years. So if I pay, 3 years or 4 years at 40 grand a year, that's $160,000. But if my balance has grown to almost 400,000, I pay 160 on the back end, and then I get like $250,000 or whatever the number is after year 10. I get that forgiven tax-free. So that is an example of somebody who would be a perfect candidate for PSLF. On the other hand, if I know as a graduating MS4, I'm probably going to be in private practice, or I'm maybe going to do a subspecialty like pain that lends itself to a private practice environment a little bit more than academics, then I know at the very beginning, I don't want to necessarily pay the bare minimum because my loan is going to grow and grow and grow. And by the time I'm done, I still have to pay back that, and I grow from 300 to 360. I still have to pay back the 360 because when I go into a for-profit private pain group or whatever the anesthesia group is, the balance has grown a lot more than it might have if I took an intentional, like, okay, during residency, I still need to make payments as I'm able because this is real money that's really going to pile up and I really have to pay it back. And so that person knowing at the beginning that they should probably go for full repayment because PSLF is not in play, that's a situation in which they should probably take a different approach and try to perhaps pay back a little bit more as they're able. And then as soon as they're done with training, probably refinance and then aggressively pay it down.
I think that's a great explanation of the two, so you get an idea of the differences between them. And I want to present a scenario to you.
Yeah.
Just because this happens out there in the real world is, it happened to me. I started working for a nonprofit right after school, and for the first 3 years, we worked for the hospital. So I was in the PSLF program. And then we had an anesthesia management group come on in and take over our contract. So now I'm stuck where I'm no longer working for a nonprofit. And what's the best way for somebody out there to handle that? Because it's continuing to happen.
Yes. And it's only going to happen more and more with what's happening literally right now with all these elective cases getting canceled, lots of physician-owned groups kind of being in distress, and a lot of consolidation happening across the industry. I agree. There has been legislation proposed in the past that would say if you're in a for-profit group underneath a 501c3 umbrella, for example, emergency medicine and anesthesia are two specialties that have a lot of this, where the emergency department is run by a private practice group, or an anesthesia department is run by a private practice group. This legislation has said we want to incorporate those people in PSLF if they're ultimately in a private group working under a 501c3. That has not passed. That has not been approved. So there have been conversations in that direction, but it's impossible to say how things may evolve. So at the current time, you're just kind of, I wish I had better news, but you're kind of one of the casualties of the complexities of student loan repayment, where, and frankly, this is not at all uncommon, whether or not it's because of an acquisition or maybe the hospital closes or you see a job that you really like in private practice land, but it pulls you away from the PSLF benefit. Any of those situations are going to result in a changing course that will have significant financial implications. So I think for somebody like that who's experiencing that, what I would say is kind of re-ask the question of, based on where I'm at now, if PSLF is no longer in play, do I A, try to find a new job that would qualify for PSLF. B, go for the longer term, and I didn't get to this yet, but the 20-year or 25-year taxable forgiveness, where you don't have to have qualifying employment, but you have to make income adjusted payments for twice as long and get forgiveness that is taxable at the end of the line. Or C, and this is the blue pill option, which is go for full repayment. So refinance and live on rice and beans and aggressively pay it down as quickly as you reasonably can.
Great explanation. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions before I move on here?
Nope.
Okay. So those are the forgiveness options. In most cases for anesthesia professionals, taxable forgiveness is something that is, it's hard to get because you have to make payments on one of these income-driven plans for such a long time without fully repaying the loan. So if you're a CRNA and you're making $180,000, whatever your required payment is on that, call it, I don't know, I'm gonna make these numbers up, $1,200 a month. If you have to pay $1,200 a month for 20 years, and that's going to bump up as your income bumps up, it's going to be, I mean, you can do that math, that's $15,000 a year, 15,000 times 20 years, that's $300,000. You'd have to owe a lot in student loans to not fully repay that amount. So taxable forgiveness for most anesthesia professionals just isn't in play. So usually it's, does PSLF make sense? If yes, great. How do we minimize payments? If no, in most cases, then full repayment is going to be the best path forward.
Okay.
So moving on here, these are the income-driven payment plans. And these are three of there's a couple more, but these are the main ones that I want to focus on. Income-based repayment, pay-as-you-earn, and revised pay-as-you-earn. These all fall under the umbrella of what's called income-driven repayment plans. So if you're going for PSLF, you need to be on one of these three. And it's very important, we've seen a lot of negative press around the PSLF program saying 99% of applicants, fail to get PSLF. I saw a Dave Ramsey video come up on my feed the other day, and just like last week, he had some pharmacist call in, and Dave Ramsey, he's like, what the heck is wrong with you? I can't believe how much debt you took out. And the pharmacist says, well, actually, it's okay because I'm going to get PSLF. And he says, no, you're not going to get PSLF. Don't you know that 99% of people get denied? The government can't do anything right. There's no way you're going to. And the pharmacist is like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. And of course, Dave Ramsey has no idea what he's talking about when it comes to student loans, because as I said, these are very complex programs, and he's a talking head with a radio show. So he's not giving nuanced advice. I have every expectation, and we at Student Loan Planner and all of our super nerdy student loan friends, we have every expectation that people who qualify for PSLF are going to receive it if they do a few things correctly. The problem with the 99% of people that were declined was 10 years ago, whenever they enrolled in the PSLF program, there's a 5-item checklist of very specific things that are not super difficult, but they are technical, and you need to get them precisely right to qualify. And 10 years ago, nobody really knew what these things were. There was not a lot of intellectual capital out there to be able to say, how do I even do this? There were very few people that could answer the question. So the 5 items you need to get right are, you need to work for a nonprofit or governmentally related institution, so VA, university, hospital. You need to work full-time as defined by that employer. You need to have the right type of loans, which are federal direct loans. You need to be on a qualifying repayment plan, which is one of these that I just mentioned, IBR, pay-as-you-earn, or revised pay-as-you-earn. And in some cases, standard repayment, but that's an aside. And then number 5 is you need to make 120 cumulative monthly payments. So that's 10 years worth of payments while fulfilling criteria 1 through 4. If you do all those things and you certify your employment along the way, do it using the employer certification form, then I have yet to hear of a person who fulfilled all 5 of those who didn't get PSLF. So most of the denials, although it's complex, if you stand to get a huge 6-figure benefit, I would say in most cases it's worth trying because the plan is real, the plan is funded, people are getting forgiveness, people who do this right, it is happening. You just need to make really sure that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's.
That's really good to know, yeah, because with all the press out there, it sounds like they're almost trying to scare you off from doing it. And I'm sure that's discouraging a lot of people. So it's good to know that if you are following those 5 steps, that you can get it.
Yes, absolutely. And the press is really just, I mean, their whole purpose of existence is to try to drive clicks, to get eyeballs so they can sell ad space. So it's always important to remember that. It's way easier to say like 99% of people failing, like screw the government, this is broken, which, I mean, it is broken, but that's beside the point. But an alternate strategy, an alternate headline could say, everybody who does this right gets forgiveness, but it's complex. I mean,
nobody would click that.
Right. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. So that's the income-driven plans. There's a couple other factors that I want to review here. So you need to know the loan type. So I said you've got to have federal direct loans to get PSLF. There's a lot of other types of loans. So direct loans, I call them like the friendly loan, like Casper the Friendly Ghost. They're very flexible. You can get on the income-driven plans. You can get PSLF. You can do forbearance. You get full disability discharge if you get hurt. These are all really, really nice benefits of direct loans. Anybody who has any loans taken out after 2011, if they're federal loans, they're almost all direct loans. Anybody who took out loans before then may well have some FFEL, which stands for Federal Family Education Loan. These do not qualify for PSLF. It's important to note. So a lot of the people who, you can kind of look at the math here. If they took out loans before 2010, that's right around sort of when PSLF was getting started. So a lot of people had FFEL loans. And so a lot of people who are applying in the last 1 to 2 years had a big bunch of these and didn't realize that FFEL did not qualify. What they needed to do was consolidate. I said, can be consolidated. What that means is if you consolidate your FFEL loans, if you have like 10 FFELs and you consolidate, it turns it into a direct consolidation loan, which then becomes the friendly loan, which then does qualify. So if you have FFELs, you got to just make sure you know how to handle those. And then there's a lot of other federal and other types. So Perkins, Parent Plus, Health Professional Student Loan, these are some examples, as well as the 2 types of private loans, which I jokingly call the not that expensive and the highway robbery types. We often see private loans 8, 9, 10, 11, 12% to make up a funding gap for higher ed, and it can be very, very painful. So anything down here, these private loans, these never would qualify for forgiveness because it's just a loan to the bank. It's not attached to a government program, so the only option there is a full repayment option. So I want to go over a couple rules of thumb and then see what questions you have for me, Patrick. So I want to make this as actionable as possible. And like I said, I don't want to tell you can do your own taxes, but there may be some instances in which a couple of these rules of thumb will be instructive for people who are trying to have some context for what type of decision they should make. So number one is if you have private loans, these are never going to be forgiven. So the only way forward is the Dave Ramsey way. And as much as he knows nothing about federal loans, he's not wrong when he says aggressive pay down is the best way out of the woods with regards to private loans. If you qualify for a cosigner, then that's a great opportunity to be able to get a lower interest rate. Obviously, there's complexity to entangling your financial life with somebody else. So you got to do that with caution. But it may be a case in which you can take higher interest federal loans at 6.8% for federal direct loans, refinance them to SoFi at 4.5%, and cut 2.5% off your interest while you're doing this aggressive repayment. And if you do that, more of your money goes to principal, less of your money goes into the bank's pocket, and you get out of debt more quickly. If you have federal loans, here's a couple rules of thumb. If you owe more than 2% your expected income, look closely at forgiveness. So if you're a CRNA and you're making $180, that means if you owe $360, which is probably could happen, but that's a lot. If you owe $360, then forgiveness is definitely something you want to think about. If you qualify for PSLF, we could modify that down and say maybe 1.5 times, so like $240. As a rule of thumb, then you should definitely be thinking about forgiveness very carefully. If it's less than 1 time, so if you're making 180 and you owe, making 180 and you owe like 140, then full repayment is probably going to make more sense for you. But again, there's no such thing as a rule of thumb or a broad brush bit of advice to a specific question. So these are just that. They're rules of thumb. Please don't take this as like personal advice for your own situation. If you have any questions, definitely talk to an expert because there's so many variables. I showed you that list of not only the questions, but the complexifiers. Are you married? Does your spouse have debt? What's your income growth potential look like? What state do you live in? How do you file taxes? Any one of these questions, if you answer it one way versus the other, could be the difference between forgiveness versus full repayment. It's that sensitive of a calculation. So it's important to look at all these variables. And again, this is why it can be really overwhelming. But it is something that you can have certainty if you're able to look at these variables appropriately and chart the best path forward that you can. And before I go to Q&A, let me just briefly talk about what's happening right now. So on Friday, the CARES Act was signed into law by Donald Trump after passing the Senate and the House. $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus. There's a lot. It's an 800-page bill, of which about 2 pages worth was dedicated to student loans, which I read those 2 pages. And the bottom line is everyone who has federal direct loans is going into an automatic forbearance as of April 1st until end of September. And it's 0% interest, $0 payments. And these months do count towards PSLF for anybody who's going towards PSLF. Now, this is very confusing because on March 13th, Donald Trump gave a speech, which I watched, and he said, we're going to work with our servicers to do 0% interest in an administrative forbearance for 2 months or for a period of time to try to provide some relief. So that was this pre-CARES Act forbearance that became available, and servicers were scrambling to figure out how to do this. So really only in the last week or two are they saying, okay, here's how you get the 2-month administrative forbearance that Donald Trump promised you access to on March 13th. That's coming online like in the last week. So what's happening is borrowers are going onto their Fed Loan Servicing Navient Nelnet website and trying to get into forbearance, not realizing that what they're trying to get into is the 2-month forbearance that Donald Trump promised on March 13th, rather than the automatic administrative forbearance that happened literally last week, effective April 1st. So the bottom line is that anybody with these direct loans has to take no action required. You don't need to do anything, just sit on your hands, and you're automatically going to be pushed into a 0%, $0 payment for 6 months. Servicers are scrambling to figure this out, so it's possible they may accidentally auto debit you, but they've said that they're going to do a 30-day look back and reconcile any errors administratively as they're trying to sort through all this. If you have other types of loans, for example, FFEL loans, in some cases these are going to qualify for this program. In some cases not. It depends on where your servicer is and some other factors that are pretty technical. I would refer you to studentloanplanner.com. They have a great article that went out the other day just breaking all this down and all the implications. If you have private loans, SoFi, Credible, Earnest, one of those, you get no relief, unfortunately. At least no relief from the government. So you're going to have to rely on the other stimulus elements of this bill to be able to hopefully meet those loan payment obligations in the next 6 months and beyond.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I assumed, just based on what I saw in the news, was that you did have to take some type of action on your own. And it sounds like if you go that route, you're actually hurting yourself. I'm curious, for the students that are and the residents that are currently trained, does this affect their interest that they're accumulating right now while they're training?
Yes. So anybody who has direct loans who is in repayment goes into automatic forbearance.
Okay.
And for 0% for 6 months. So basically everything pauses. And so nothing happens on your loans for the next 6 months, with the exception of you get PSLF credit for those 6 months, assuming that your employment qualifies.
I think what I'm trying to get at is, what if you're not making payments already, but you're actually...
So if you're in forbearance or in med school or something like that?
So you're still in med school, or you're in CRNA school, or AA school, where...
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think you need to be in repayment in order to get the forbearance. I'm not sure if interest will continue to accumulate if you're still taking out loans actively. I'm honestly not sure. And I'm not sure. So here's the other thing is servicers are trying to figure out how this is going to work at the same time that Congress sort of did a broad brush, like, here's what we want to do. And so this is still being worked out real time. So when I said, this is like the Wild West, exactly. The experts literally right now are still scrambling to figure out the answers to these very specific questions.
All right. Going back to income-based repayments.
Yeah.
So how do they determine that when you're first coming out of school? Are they looking for a letter from your employer?
Great question. So income-driven repayment is the umbrella under which there are several plans. Mm-hmm. For any of these, IBR, pay-as-you-earn, or revised pay-as-you-earn, the payment is going to be a calculation based on your earned income. there's usually a 1-year lag. So for example, if you're a resident coming out of residency, you're going to enter repayment. If you finish med school in May, consolidate your loans in May, enter repayment in July. They're going to say, okay, what plan do you want to get on? Say you pick revised pay as you earn. Then they're going to say, please certify your income. Did you file a tax return last year? And you're going to say, yes, no, whatever. And if you filed a tax return last year, but you were a barista at Starbucks because you're also an MS4 and trying to pass your classes, then you're going to send them that tax return that says, I made $4,200 last year. And then they're going to take that $4,200, and because your income is so low, anything less than about 18 grand results in a $0 payment. And then the next year, after you've got 30K of income for a half a year of residency, your anniversary comes up and you have to recertify again. And you're going to use your prior year tax return again, but instead of showing 4,600, it's going to show 30 grand. So your payment's going to go from 0 to like $150. And then the following year, you're going to go from 4,600 to 30 grand to 60 grand because you now have a full year of resident income being reported on your tax return. So you're going to give them that tax return, and you're going to go from $0 to $150 to $300 for your payment amount. So there's always that 1-year lag cycle.
That's good to know. Yeah. I mean, it creates an interesting question too, then, if whether or not you want to start picking up extra shifts during your first year, your first couple of years, because this is now going to affect your payments, where the third year out, maybe you're having kids or something changes in your life where you're not working as much. And now all of a sudden you have these huge monthly payments. Yeah,
that's a good point. And what I would say is knowing if you're a red pill or blue pill situation is going to help you answer all those questions. Like if I'm going for forgiveness, then I actively want to do everything I can to pay the least I possibly can. Now, I would say that does not include trying to make less money. That would be like saying, I want to pay less taxes, therefore I want to make less money. Yep. That doesn't really, it's still a net gain to you if you make more, always. But there are other things you can do to intentionally try to minimize your loan payment amount. For example, making payments, stashing as much as you can into a 403B, 401k, or TSP or HSA. Those are pre-tax retirement plan contributions that will reduce your AGI. So your AGI is your adjusted gross income. When your AGI goes down, that reduces the calculation, which results in this is how much you're going to pay on your loans. And when you reduce your AGI, say your taxable income was $100,000 and you made 0 401k contributions. That $100,000 will then go from your taxable income to your AGI, and then it's adjusted by an amount called the federal poverty line threshold. So 1.5 times the federal poverty line threshold equals discretionary income. This discretionary income number is the number from which your payment is going to be derived. So if you're on revised pay as you earn, discretionary income times 10% equals your annual payment required. So if we kind of look at this whole math problem again and say, okay, I started with 100K taxable income, it fell all the way down to my AGI, minus 1.5 times federal poverty line equals discretionary income. If we go back to that and say, instead of taking 100 taxable income to 100 AGI, I want to do 100 taxable income minus $19,500, which is the 401k maximum contribution, which takes your AGI to $80,500. Mm-hmm. So that number then gets reduced by 1.5 times the poverty line, which then takes this down by, whatever that is. And the net result is you're saving between $1,000 and $2,000 a year on your loan payments. So it's essentially the equivalent of an employer match in your 401k, but instead of getting it in your 401k, you actually get it in terms of reduced loan payment due. So this can be a really powerful thing to be aware of if you're going for PSLF. You want to definitely stuff those retirement accounts full as much as your cash flow allows, because you're going to have a smaller required payment on your loans. You're going to get a bigger forgiveness amount at the end of the line.
Say that makes a lot of sense, and I think you gave us a lot to digest there. I think we're going to sort of stop it here. If anybody's watching this video, please leave comments down at the bottom. Any questions that you might have for Justin, I'll make sure he gets to them and we reply to you. I think we're actually going to do a follow-up video on this based on what type of information comes in from you guys. So feel free to leave those comments down there and questions. Also, make sure you check out Justin's podcast, Anesthesia Success. It's a great podcast. Listen to it anytime it comes on out. And what I really enjoy about it is he has real life. He has professionals out there who've been navigating the world. Sort of gives you a leg up when you're entering your career. Justin, I really appreciate you coming on. We'll make sure to leave his information down in the show notes so you can contact him. And my final thought really is, we're anesthesia professionals. We don't really have a whole lot of education into student loan debt, financial planning. I highly recommend that you reach out, get that help, even if it's just a phone call. They can sort of get you on the right track. So with that, everybody have a great day. Make sure you visit bagmax.com for the latest anesthesia jobs, career navigation information, and anesthesia scholarship news. Justin, I appreciate you being on.
Thank you, Patrick. It's been a pleasure.
Take care.